The bigger picture that we're addressing here is every team having a data-driven mindset. I'm working with a creative team and they are so prideful of the work, and it was beautiful, but it didn't have the effect it would on the customer. It makes a huge impact. Giving access to the data, going out of your way to teach someone how to interpret and read the data, because
today on the podcast, we'll be speaking to Lauren Burges. Lauren is a strategic customer experience manager with Content Square, an experience analytics platform. We'll speak to Lauren today a bit about the volume of data that is so readily available to so many organizations and how that volume can sometimes get in the way of people keeping focused on key business objectives. We'll also talk to Lauren about the benefits of investing in the post-click experience and how those benefits can be properly articulated and quantified to leadership. We'll also be talking to Lauren today about the team and having different silos in those teams and the challenges that those silos can cause, but how we can knock down those walls, how teams can become more cross-functional and ultimately deliver value to both the customer and to the organization. We're very happy to have Lauren on the show today. Let's get started. Lauren, thank you very much for being on the show today. We're very happy to have you with us.
absolutely. Thank you for having me. A longtime fan of yours. I've been following your LinkedIn content for a while now, so it's just super exciting to finally get this on the books and be able to chat with you.
Oh, thank you. You're my first official fan. I appreciate that. I'm happy to be able to have you on the show because obviously your background working with Content Square and working with experience analytics is so appropriate, so apropos to what we talk about on the show, which is really that aspect of the digital customer experience that we consider to be of the utmost importance, which is that post-click component. So after the advertising, right, after the search, after all that fun stuff, what happens kind of when the rubber meets the road and people have to actually start gathering enough information to make informed decisions about whether they're going to become a lead, complete an application, make a purchase, whatever that call to action happens to be on the website. So that's the space where you guys live and breathe. And so you're constantly working across multiple companies, organizations, industries, every single day, essentially trying to help them get the most value out of this technology that they can use to understand what people are doing, get a sense of why they're doing it so that they can address those different challenges and friction points along that experience.
Yeah, so kind of my background before that was in retail. And so we received reports, quite consistently from different teams, but I was missing the why. And so when I got approached by Content Square and started with that team about 3.5 years ago, it was a no-brainer for me. I was so fascinated by the product and the tool. And so it's been a really fun experience working in different, different sectors of customer success, different customers and different verticals. So yeah, I'm just super excited to share all the things I've learned today.
Experience analytics has really blown up in these last several years, right? I mean, between Content Square, Full Story, Quantum Metrics, a couple of other players in the marketplace, there's just so much robust data that kind of exists in that space. And one of the concerns that I know we always deal with when we're dealing with our clients, I know you must deal with as well, is that people kind of get lost in the data. Like there's so much happening and so much going on that you can dig into, so many kind of interesting nuggets and kind of rabbit holes to go down that maybe it can be easy to lose sight of what the definition of success is and kind of keep your focus and keep people kind of moving forward. So I wonder, as you work with these different organizations, how do you help them? And particularly, how do you help their leadership kind of define and keep a focus on what success means in terms of what they're trying to do from a business standpoint?
Yeah, it's the question that people pay thousands of dollars for when they go to webinars just on this specific topic alone. In all seriousness, though, it does take a lot of doing your homework. And if anyone in your audience is not familiar with like the customer success function, there's a thing we go through called strategic planning. This exercise is done at a more micro level, which is focused on your business unit and will likely change within the course of a year. However, what's not going to change is what the leadership shares in common, and that's going to be mostly their corporate objectives. With that being said, when you're working with leadership, there is that ton of information you can do online. You talked about doing your homework earlier. You have to be all in when you meet with these leaders and with your customers. When you're speaking with them and getting alignment, that discussion shifts from that more micro overview to that more macro overview. And then you can talk strategies that each leader is using to achieve that objective. But really, that's where we go with bridging that gap, is like, where is the common ground that we can find?
Oftentimes marketers have a challenge kind of making those kind of connection points between the different facets of leadership. So marketing, we kind of get enamored with our vanity metrics too often, really. But then when we have to kind of make a connection and say, well, how do those matter to the business? And not just in terms of like revenue, that's relatively straightforward, easy, but how does that matter in terms of like managing costs, managing profitability, right? Lifetime value, customer retention, cash that's being generated for the business, right? So these are the things that now the CEO and the CFO and other teams are really focused on. And it's important to understand those things, but all those things ultimately are being directly impacted by the digital experience. What's happening on that site, and either the ease with which people are doing it or the friction and the how problematic it is to do that are going to directly kind of trickle down and have an impact on those key metrics for the business. It makes me think about that. In particular, it happens when it comes to those kind of high consideration purchases, right? So I know a lot of what we deal with, a lot of what you guys deal with as well, in terms of the capabilities of the tool, is those purchases that are a little bit more decision heavy, where people are a little bit more invested. There's more emotional risk. There's more financial risk involved. I think you kind of call them grudge purchases, because you kind of have to, kind of work your way through them, right, to make these decisions. How do you think about those journeys in comparison to perhaps what's more of kind of an impulse buy? How do you kind of compare and contrast those?
Yeah, and I think it's so mindful with companies that have those bigger ticket items, that the psychology is going to be much different for the customer than it would your average retail purchase of maybe a cart of basket or 100 or less. The grudge purchase, so to speak, is really going to delay the customer until they get to that point where they're ready to buy. They tend to price shop a lot more, and they really come to the site sometimes to even seek reassurance on their purchase that, as cheesy as this sounds, is going to yield some type of ROI in their life. They're not maybe thinking of it as an ROI in terms of us as business folks talking about it, but they're thinking in terms of, is this purchase going to provide me happiness? A good example off the top of my brain is a mattress. Is that mattress going to be worth the money? Am I going to get a better night's sleep? So the stakes are really high with those purchases. So things that I tend to think about and that I keep top of mind, especially kind of looking at this from, if I am the business or if I'm consulting with a business that has that type of offering. Number one, do you even sell your product on your site? Because we assume that some companies do, but some companies don't. They're purely informational. Number two, what proof can we offer, or do they need in order to actually go through with their purchase? And then number three, what moment of doubt do they have, or what stalls them? And that's when you talked about that post-click experience of maybe, are they going to have a negative experience on the site that's going to deter them away from the brand, or are we going to present them with a positive experience? And being able to measure that is extremely difficult if you don't have the right tooling at times. And so all that to say, those are the things that I'm thinking about, especially when talking with my customers about it.
It's interesting, right? Because those are the exact things that we kind of alluded to earlier that tie back to those higher level success metrics.
Yeah.
When it takes a person a longer period of time to make that decision, right? That's increasing that conversion cycle of cash. So you spent money getting the person to the site, and now that business cycle starts where it's, okay, how long is it going to take for that person to make a decision? Are they going to make it in a few days? Is it going to be a few weeks of shopping? And the experience on the websites that they are interacting with is going to have a huge impact on that, right? How quickly can I, as you beautifully said, how quickly can I alleviate those doubts? How quickly can I eliminate those fears? Can I feel comfortable with this purchase? Can I have that level of trust that I need to in the brand in order to make that decision to actually go through with it? Which of course is going to be helpful in terms of getting return on all that money that was spent from the advertising perspective. And then ultimately, how happy am I going to be with that purchase? Am I going to now be retained as a customer? And am I going to kind of come back? Am I going to refer? And again, now we're getting into kind of total customer acquisition costs, and also the capability of saying, how do I kind of reduce the future costs as well? Because now this person has become a loyal customer because they had such a great experience dealing with me from a digital standpoint. Do you find that at times you have to kind of, I don't know if battle is the right word, that might be too aggressive, but oftentimes it's very easy to say, hey, we're going to spend more money on advertising, right? That seems like a quick and easy fix to a problem. Um, it becomes more complicated when you now have to say, well, the problem isn't necessarily so much that you're not driving traffic. The issue is that the traffic is having a hard time being able to navigate the experience and actually be able to kind of complete that conversion action that you want them to take. Do you find that you have to kind of help balance your clients out and kind of say, hey, maybe the problem isn't here and that you need to spend more money here. It's that you need to spend more time here understanding what's happening in order to get the most out of the dollars that you're spending from an advertising perspective?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, every year I try to keep up to trend, especially after Q4 with like yearly benchmarks and how things are doing and reading different, publications on that. And then every year it seems like, and I'm not a marketer, but from what I read, the customer ad spend goes up so significantly. And every year it seems like a sticker shock. And then it's like the next year it goes up even more. And it's like, what is going on? But once the customer is on the site, that's what matters most. I mean, to your point, I've seen brands invest in ad spend and like 95% of their traffic is leaving less than 10 seconds. And it's like, there's so much more to that. And we can see that bounce with an experience analytics tool. But there's a deeper conversation, though, that marketing needs to have within themselves. It's, yeah, like, what are we serving? Why is this not sticking? Is it, broken to link? Like there's so many possibilities, but just kind of prompting that team for getting them curious is going to be a huge factor in that. So I think I kind of strayed a little off topic, but that's a really, really important thing for me is I think that there's a lot of times brands, if I'm in marketing, I'm worrying about one sector. If I'm in, if I'm on the cart team, I'm worrying about another sector. But really, tying it all back to the beginning, if we want our company or our brand to be successful, we need to be able to tie these things all together and achieve the business objective in that same way. And so those are kind of the things that come to mind, especially with like marketing and acquisition costs, I should say, and making sure we're serving the right content and then measuring the experience for what is working well and being able to say why.
A couple of things really stand out to me. One that you mentioned, different teams sometimes own different sections of the website. And again, you run into this. Maybe there's a team that kind of runs what, like the content section of the website, and then another team kind of runs the store, the cart section of the website. And sometimes we can get so kind of lost in those team definitions and those team silos that we don't think about the fact that the customer doesn't know and doesn't care. They just see it as one site. They see it as one brand. And they're simply trying to navigate through this whole experience as easily as possible, get the key information they need along the way in order to kind of fluidly make that decision. So sometimes those internal walls, right, end up being walls that stand in the way of making the kind of improvements that you referred to. I want to kind of talk about it this way, if we could, for a second. And I'm probably going to oversimplify a bit, but I kind of think about this in three buckets, right? So on the one hand, there's kind of the persuasion of the site. So what information is being given to me on the site that highlights the value of this particular product, the value of the brand, why should I buy from you as opposed to someone else, that kind of information. Then you've got like the user experience, which is kind of the friction, right? So how easy is this to use? Can I find where I need to look? Can I find a size chart? Is it easy to find the add to cart button? Is it easy to go through checkout? Is the form, very clear and very smooth, right? So there's kind of these friction areas that you want people to move through. But this third tier that probably doesn't get as much attention and as much love as it probably should, and I'd like to talk about it for a second, is just like when stuff on the site is broken. When there's just kind of there's errors on the site. And those things can cost as much, if not more money than a poor user experience or maybe a site that doesn't do a good job kind of building value. And I know that's something that the world of experience analytics has really been focusing on lately. It's really saying, hey, how do we understand, number one, what errors and issues are happening on the site? And is there a way to quantify that and say, okay, is this having an impact on what people are actually doing? Is that something you can speak to for a second?
Yeah, it's such a good question too, because it's the not flashy stuff. In my experience in that third bucket is that it sometimes gets deprioritized over the other two buckets, especially when we can present the more pretty things. And a lot of times, I feel like a lot of the folks with those more foundational errors, right? Like it's teams of devs and it's different teams that necessarily haven't been taught like the practice of impact quantifying that amount and presenting it. So my methodology and like how I look at this is, and it's taken me time as well to learn this, but really tying the fix to some type of cost, right? Traditionally in e-commerce, we think of revenue being tied to sales. However, there's so many angles to come from, especially in marketing acquisition cost. And the big one is opportunity cost. And I think a lot of these things are becoming a bit easier to kind of bounce ideas and calculate with AI and having that accessible. I will say, selfish plug here, but the great thing about Content Square is that there's that easy button, so to speak, because we have a module called impact quantification, and it will tell you how much an error is costing you over time, or how it's, if you don't have an e-commerce site, how it's affecting your goal. And we can do that based on speed analysis. We can do that based on error analysis. But with that being said, I'm fully aware that not everyone listening to the podcast has access to these sorts of tools. So my advice, and what I did when I didn't have access to these tools back when I was in retail, is keep it scrappy. Find ways to quantify that true cost when presenting to management. It's a whole lot easier to get the executive team to listen when you frame it as something that's like, hey, this is costing us $100,000 per quarter, rather than, hey, this is an upgrade we'd like to make. And that's just the world we live in. And, you could really be saving your brand or your company from tons of pain later on by making that case and really advocating internally for that.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, right? Being scrappy. I mean, there's ways even using free tools like Google Analytics to track errors happening, right? At least, right? So even if you presented like hypotheticals of kind of saying, hey, look, X% of all the visitors on the site, over the course of the last X months have experienced this error, right? And they didn't buy, right? We can say that these people didn't buy. What if we got 10% of those people to buy? What if we got 5% of those people to buy? Like here's the revenue impact of that, right? If they left because of that experience. And I think a lot of times it's easy to kind of downplay those errors, like they're not a big deal. But the way I always explain it is, you're on your way home from work or from the gym or wherever you're going, and you need to stop real quick and you need to grab a box of cereal. So, you go by the grocery store, you run in real quick, you get this box of cereal, and you're trying to run out. You go and like the self-checkout lines are broken, like they're, the machines are down. And so you look at the regular checkout and the lines are like 10 people deep. And you're like, I don't have time for this. Like, I'm not up for this. And you take the cereal and you put it on the nearest shelf. You don't care where. And you run out and you're like, you know what? I'll deal with this later. Like, I'll get this later, right? And it's easy to say that we do that in real life because most of us do to some degree. Sometimes people don't understand. Well, people do the same thing online. Like, you're looking at something on your phone while you're waiting on a doctor's appointment. You're maybe looking at something at lunch, during work, whatever the case is. And if you run into that point of friction because something isn't working, because some button is malfunctioning or some JavaScript error is firing and the page isn't loading correctly, you're going to be like, you know what? I don't have time to kind of, fool with this. I'm just going to come back and do it some other time. And as you and I both know, most times some other time doesn't come. Like the people don't come back or they go somewhere else to kind of, to kind of find it something that's more convenient. And that's lost, right? That's that opportunity cost that you were speaking about. So I love the fact that you said, hey, look, find some way to attach a number to it and quantify it so that people can see the importance of kind of having that investment made in that. Is kind of walking your clients through that process and helping them understand how they can articulate this to their leadership to make that investment. Is that something that you kind of help your clients do?
Oh, yeah. I mean, and it's something for me that brings me so much joy because, I started without really having the tool set of knowing how to do this. And I only realized that tool set by practicing and being able to see it in action. And so for me, being able to work with them and share that joy, it really helps them. And I'm not going to lie and say that it works 100% of the time. Sometimes my customers can present everything perfectly, and they're still gonna know. But I will say that I feel a lot of pride as being able to have helped them and being able to at least now, like they're prepared and they're good to go. And the next time that comes around, it might be a different outcome. So all that to say, it is something we work with. We also, I think, a lot of times, the platform allows us to be really proactive. So like being able to kind of before something goes live, being able to catch it early. And again, that goes back to the opportunity cost. Like if you're not showing your leadership the things that you catch for the opportunity cost, then you're at risk for not being able to keep that investment, especially in this macro environment where companies are looking to cut. And so it's really important, and I'm reminding myself as I speak too, when those things happen, when we're associating with cost, when we're presenting to maybe management or even your direct manager, it's really important to capture those stories, both personally and professionally, and it's only going to help you grow in your career. So all that to say, just a lot of thoughts there. I'm pretty passionate about speed and site errors, so for me, it's a fun topic. But yeah, it's something that takes practice, and for sure, and especially being able to tell a compelling story and present it. Easier said than done. It takes practice. It takes time, but I'm confident that if you're investing enough to listen to a podcast in order to get better, you can absolutely do it.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And it's funny, the way that you kind of explain that really, really resonates with me because you're talking about the importance of telling the story, right? And positioning it that way so that it really kind of does something that impacts the crowd of people that's listening to what you're saying. And that becomes so challenging when it comes to the post-click experience because of the complexities of it, because you've got multiple teams involved. It's not just you're talking to maybe one leader or one team. You might be talking to both the engineering team, and at the same time, maybe you're with the analytics team. So you're kind of talking to your peers or your leader. Then you've got like the UX team that's involved in that, perhaps the digital product team that's involved in that, or just the product team in general, right? So you've got all these kind of players at the table because they all have a stake in this and what's happening with how the site's performing, with what it's doing, what it's not doing, what's working, what's not working. And you've got to speak in a way that you're able to kind of win over all of these different groups that have their own agenda, that kind of speak their own language, right? That have their own challenges. Oftentimes they have their own goals. And the larger the organization is, the more the legacy the organization is, the more complicated all those things become. Do you find that you kind of find yourself in the mix of that, kind of helping your clients and the people that you deal with on a consistent basis kind of navigate that and use the data to craft the story that can ultimately affect all those different teams?
Yeah, and we have to bring up company acronyms. They never go away. They always differ by the company. And I'm always asking my customers, okay, pause. I know you just used this acronym. What does this mean? But in all seriousness, I love that question because we talked about leadership alignment earlier. And sometimes it's the easy part because typically leadership plays a hand in buying the software. It's even harder, and as you mentioned, the bigger the organization, unfortunately, in my experience, I find the more that teams get siloed, it's, especially given the sizes of their operation, it is hard to get them aligned every day. And websites are these big, complex machines. As you mentioned, there's several different, teams that typically work on that. And, there is that rare serendipitous moment where you walk into a new account or a new team and they are perfectly aligned, but most of the time you don't. And those messy realities, I have to say, number one, it takes time. Like, especially with that larger organization, you have to be very patient and very understanding that, my role as a CSM, I consider myself a consultant. And it's just something that there's organizational history that's rooted there. Like there's a lot, but I kind of made sure I thought about this, and what works for me, it's simple and it's not easy. Number one, making sure every team you're working with feels heard. That's one of, I think, identifying your superpowers, and one of mine is active listening. But I've noticed in my career, people move a lot faster when they feel seen and heard. And I think number one, like learning each team's business goals in their own language, because a lot of times we think that they're separate, and and sometimes they really are, but usually they don't conflict with each other. Usually they're all working for the same goal. And then number three, just like finding that overlap and turning it into a shared target. And typically, it's pretty rare. Sometimes we'll get all of the teams into one room, but it is pretty rare. But typically, when you do, I think there's sometimes a lot of fear, especially if there's that deep root history. But I've never been in a situation, either on site or in a Zoom call, where people from other teams come in and start yelling at each other. Right? Everyone's there to learn something new and work together, and so it does take time, but I definitely think it's possible. And I think just, again, being aware, being active listeners, showing compassion, like those very human elements, like you could do the work, but like being human and building that trust is also like the most important thing and the most top of mind thing for me.
I wonder, in your experience, both, being a client and customer of marketing tools like this, living in kind of that corporate world, but also now working with different teams and different organizations and industries. Why do you think that's so hard? Why do you think this cross-functional communication, getting these teams aligned, why do you think that ends up being such a challenge?
If I think about it, I mean, it is dependent and unique to the situation, but I think especially post-COVID, everyone's just moving so fast. And I think it's really easy for leaders or teams, including myself at times, to get hyper-focused on one thing and then forget about the bigger picture. And sometimes we just need to be reminded about that bigger picture. And that's, again, I feel very cheesy tying it all back to that strategic objective or that mission of the company, right? Anytime that I feel lost, I try to do that even internally. I try to remind customers of that as well. But it's challenging. I think everyone has targets that they personally need to hit. And when you get hyper-focused, other things have to take a backseat, right? It's just the way it is. So I think also in that consultative nature, just serving as that point of contact. And I forget what book it is, but there's a book and it talks about active listening and talks about, do you need a hug or a high five or to be heard? And those are things like little cues I try to pick up on. If I can tell someone's stressed, I try to kind of logic in my brain, but also active listen as well. And so I would say those are the big things, and those are kind of just some of the tactics off the top of my head that I use to be able to deal with those, because especially end of quarter times, it ggets stressful, and showing grace.
I like that you called out that these are people, and they're under stress too. Probably you as the listener, you're feeling your stress, but these people are feeling stressed too. They have their pressure. You mentioned they have their goals that you want to try to understand and appreciate. And I think, as you also very well said, it comes down to leadership and the kind of alignment they bring across the teams, right? What are we keeping focused on from the organizational standpoint and what those goals are? How are we keeping the customer at the center of all this and aligning and saying, how does the work that I'm doing and the goals that me and my team have, how does that impact the customer? Because if everyone looks at it from that perspective, then when we're now told this story about the customer and we're shown data about the customer and the issues and challenges they're having, now it's a little bit easier to kind of back that up and kind of say, okay, so this is how what I'm doing is impacting this and how I can now make this better. And I've heard this in multiple podcast episodes across multiple industries, where again, when it comes to these cross-functional teams, the one thing that people say does work well is, we strive to keep the customer and customer data at the focus, right? Let's evangelize this data, let's share it across different teams. Is that something that I'm sure you're going to say yes, but I'd love for you to speak to it a little bit. How big of a proponent are you of saying, hey, look, these data points that you're getting, don't hoard them, share them. Let people see what's happening. Let people understand what's happening with the customers across the experience of the site.
That's spot on. And that's definitely my philosophy. And I think, especially, and not trying to call out any teams, but I think sometimes we are very prideful of our work. And so maybe on a homepage, which I don't know why homepages politically are always a battle, no matter the company. But anyway, what I'm getting at is I think that the bigger picture that we're addressing here is every team having a data-driven mindset. And I think sometimes again, with like more creative folks or the creative industry, right? Not putting everyone into a bucket. There's plenty of creative people that also like the data, but I've run into situations before where I'm working with a creative team and they are so prideful of the work and it was beautiful, but it didn't have the effect that it would on the customer. Like the customer didn't think it was clickable and it was, or vice versa, something very small like that, right? But it makes a huge impact. So I think overall, like you mentioned, right, giving access as much as possible to the data, but also like going out of your way. And I know this is everyone's very stressed or strapped for time, but like going out of your way to teach someone how to interpret and read the data, because if you don't know that part either, then you're not going to get anywhere. You can show the data, but you have to be able to again, going back to storytelling, you have to be able to interpret the data. And I think sometimes that's hard with like GA reports or things like that, but it's a lot easier when we can show it visually. So if you have an opportunity to do that, but again, that's my biggest thing is moving the culture to be more data driven, because that's ultimately gonna solve for that problem. But again, I'm saying this like it's a really easy thing to do. It is not an easy thing to do, and it does take time. But I tend to look at it and a little bit more grassroots. Like let's start like with one person or one team at a time.
Absolutely. And I think to your point, I think doing it grassroots is the way to do it. Because I mean, if you can show a small impact and a small win, right, that's a little bit of progress, and that will buy you enough credibility to maybe do something a little bit bigger and get a little bit more progress, and you kind of chip away at it, right? You kind of work your way, down the road, so to speak. And I think as people begin to see, and I say people, I mean the people on the individual teams begin to see how it impacts them and makes their work a little bit easier, how it helps them, for example, better prioritize, what it is they need to work on, and knowing what to focus on, what should come first, what should come second. These are things that are going to help them get home a little bit earlier, right? I mean, that's also what they care about, right? How do I get home earlier? How do I hit my goals and perhaps get my bonus or my bump or whatever I'm looking for, right? It all comes down to kind of just being human and just being selfish, and that's fair. Like, we're each of us have our own individual concerns. So again, making that tie-in and saying, hey, look, this will help you to kind of get further down the road of the things that matter and are important to you. And being able to do that even in small ways can have, as you mentioned, kind of huge implications and impacts down the road. So I really like how you kind of mentioned starting there from a grassroots level. I think that's something that really resonates with our listeners. Lori, I'm going to leave you with this question. Now that you've kind of been, again, on both sides of the equation, you've been in a world where you've worked on the corporate side, you've been without experience analytics, without the kind of insights that world brings and the data that world brings. Now you've been on the side of organizations where you've not only are working with them as they have this data, but you've helped to kind of onboard them and kind of say, hey, this was life before, Content Square. This is now life, after Content Square. And we're not trying to make a commercial here for Content Square, but whatever experience analytics tool you're using, if you were to kind of to say to people and kind of plead to them, if maybe they're thinking about experience analytics and thinking about making that investment, kind of what are the key kind of arguments that come to place that kind of say, hey, look, these are the things that you should be thinking about that will really show you why an investment in experience analytics would be important for your organization?
Yeah, for me, it's all about the why. And as cheesy as it sounds, what I mean by that is, an A/B test can win, and we can see the results in an A/B test. But like, why did it win? What other metrics were impacted by these segmentations of experience? So for me, being able to put the why into the equation of, we have the data where, as you mentioned, I know a lot of companies were swimming in data, but why is that happening? And so for me, a digital experience analytics tool does that. And again, going back to the quantifying piece, right? It makes quantifying things a whole lot easier. If someone calls into a contact center and has an issue, right? we can actually go in, other experience analytics tools may be able to do this as well, but we can go in and see, okay, was there an error that this session experienced, or was it something that they maybe thought something was clickable and it wasn't, and so we can quantify that, and that again can save tons of resourcing time in the long run. And so for me, that's the most compelling thing. It really, again, coming from a world without experience analytics and now being in a world with, I see the space really converging in the next couple of years. I think that it's going to become a must-have. I think more and more companies will develop it, and then also it's just going to be like something in the MarTech stack. Like it will be a must-have in the MarTech stack. So all that to say, like there's still answers you can solve without it, but it just makes life a whole lot easier with it. And so that's really, and there's so many different use cases, which is the other really fun part about it. And so depending on what you're trying to solve, if it's a why question, experience analytics would probably be able to answer that.
And I like that answer a lot. It pulls so many levers above and beyond just revenue, right? It pulls the cash lever, it pulls the cost lever. And these are levers that are critically important to leadership in addition to revenue. So we're not just kind of being myopic about what we're looking at in terms of metrics that matter to the overall business, but it allows us to have a much broader understanding. And now if we're pulling multiple levers at the same time, the overall net impact is going to be that much bigger. And the importance of being able to have that impact in the business and of what you as an individual, contributor are able to do, or individual leader are able to do in the organization becomes that much more profound on the organization and on leadership. So yeah, I think that's a great answer. And it's such a great note to leave our listeners with. Lauren, thank you so much for your time today. So happy to have your experience and all that you were able to share.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Samir. You always have the most wonderful questions. Just super excited to have been a part of this experience.